Whenever you're ready.
Okay, well, welcome everyone to Adult Forum. We're going to be talking about something that has been in the news lately, and you'd never think it would be something that became so political, but believe it or not, it's the Postal Service. And so we'll talk about that and see where that conversation leads us to in our faith. So here's the Wired Word article about the Postal Service.
U.S. Postal Service, yeah.
Boy. The performance of the United States Postal Service has been the center of debate on Capitol Hill, with some Republican lawmakers trying to portray the reports of delayed mail, dismantled sorting machines, and removed mail boxes as conspiracy theories. Representative James Comer, Republican Kentucky, testified on Friday, August 21st, that there have been no delays occurring throughout the USPS, United States Postal Service. Representative Carolyn Maloney, Democrat, New York, responded by saying, unfortunately, this is part of the problem. Some Republicans would prefer to shut their eyes. Postmaster General Louis DeJoy, an appointee of President Trump, testified that there had been a dip in the level of service. Prior to his June appointment, changes had occurred, including the removal of mailboxes and sorting machines. Other mailboxes and machines were in the process of being removed. But DeJoy suspended these actions until after November 3rd, saying, "We all feel bad about what the dip in the level of service has been." He promised to deploy processes and procedures that advance any election mail, in some cases ahead of our first-class mail. He said that he would not restore the removed sorting machines, however, saying, they are not needed. DeJoy focused on election mail because the president has said that he wanted to block United States Postal Service funding to prevent mail-in voting. They need that money in order to have the post office work so it can take all of these millions and millions of ballots, the president said on Fox Business Network. Now, if we don't make a deal, that means they don't get the money. That means they can't have universal mail-in voting, that you just can't have it. All states allow for absentee voting, in which a registered voter requests a ballot, which is mailed to him or her and then is returned. This is not the same as mail-in voting, in which ballots are mailed to all names on the voter registration rolls. Many observers, and mainly Republican politicians, claim that mail-in voting greatly increases the likelihood of fraud and has resulted in chaotic elections when held. Election officials of both parties are actively encouraging citizens to vote by mail as a way of avoiding the spread of COVID-19. Congress is involved because Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution says that the Congress shall have the power to establish post offices and post roads. The House of Representatives passed the Delivering for America Act on Saturday, August 22nd, in an attempt to grant $25 billion in funding to the Postal Service. As of this writing, for this wired word lesson, the bill's future is uncertain in the Senate, and the White House has sent mixed signals about whether the president will sign it. Financial problems with the Postal Services are nothing new. For years, revenue has been dropping as people have shifted their style of communication. With the advent of the internet, people began to send texts or emails rather than written correspondence. Bill payment moved online for many Americans, and then the Great Recession cut the volume of first-class mail by 13 billion items over 2 years, a drop that has not been overcome in the years that followed. Still, the Postal Service is a beloved institution. A recent Pew Research Center survey shows that 91% of people have a favorable view of the post office, the highest of any federal government agency. Sorry, could not resist. Postal Service has been burdened by $160.9 billion in debt brought on by Congress's 2006 Postal Accountability and Enhancement Act. The act ensure that the Postal Service's 633,000 workers would be offered prepaid health and retirement benefits, an obligation not typical for private companies or even government agencies. The Postal Service missed its first payment of these expenses worth $5.5 billion in 2011, and since then the debt has continued to pile up. The repayment and responsibility that they've been able to meet has exacerbated over the years, said Carrie Brick, a former chief of staff for Representative John McHugh, Republican, New York, a co-sponsor of the 2006 law. It was bad, and it got more bad, and it got worse, but now it's desperate, said McHugh. Back in 2006, the PAEA Act seemed like a responsible decision. First-class mail volume was healthy, and from 2004 to 2006, the agency made $6 billion in profits. But first-class mail volume plummeted between 2010 and 2019, and the United Postal Service ran up larger and larger operating deficits. Now the pandemic has caused a loss of revenue because of lower demand for highly profitable personal and marketing mail, which could lead to a loss of $23 billion over the next 18 months. The Postal Service is now facing a double crisis, finding money to finance operations and paying down a debt while running on an ongoing deficit. Both these challenges point to a need for a government bailout, plus continued restructuring of the Postal Service. In the face of these challenges, the Postmaster General has said that this #1 priority is to ensure that election mail is received on time. Speaking to Senate Homeland Security Committee on Friday, August 21st, DeJoy said, "As we head into the election season, I want to assure this committee and the American public that the Postal Service is fully capable of delivering the nation's election mail securely and on time." He also expressed support for voting by mail, although it is unclear if he meant absentee voting or mail-in voting. He told senators, "I think the American public should be able to vote by mail, and the Postal Service will support it." There we are. Are you planning to vote by mail, Mother Cameron?
So, here's the deal. I have voted absentee before, by mail. So I have to talk about election. It's nostalgic for me to go to the actual polling place and vote. So since I was in high school, so like my junior year, I started, my grandmother was the poll mistress. She was the poll manager for her particular polling place. And so I always had to vote early voting or absentee because I would be working in the polls. But until about the time I went off to seminary, from the time I was in high school till I left for seminary 8 years ago, I've always been at the polling place on election day. So, first thing in the morning to open everything up. And I remember pencil and paper ballots when we first got trained on the machines.
Yeah.
So there is something to me about being in the polling place. Mm-hmm. However, because of COVID, I don't know if I will do early voting or if I will request a ballot. So I know I don't have much longer to decide if I'm gonna get my ballot in, to give it plenty of time to get to me and plenty of time to make sure that it gets back, or to do the drop off, right? To make sure that it gets to one of the drop off sites, or just go to a early voting site. But COVID, I did not vote in person in our last one because of COVID. I did an absentee ballot for that.
Yeah, Jan and I did an absentee ballot for the primary. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's the first time we've done that. And one of the frustrations with it is the ballot was obviously printed before some people had dropped out.
Yeah.
So here we are trying to read about the people we want to vote for, and we find out, wait a minute, we wanted to vote for this person and they dropped out. Wait a minute. And they're still listed on the ballot.
Yeah.
So, I mean, at least one of the things that happens with when you actually vote in person and electronically is that the ballot is up to date.
Yeah.
The mail-in ballots, you know, you have to be very careful because they're not up to date.
Yeah.
They're printed at one point in time and nobody changes them.
Yeah.
So that's a concern.
Yeah. So what is your experience with the US Postal Service?
Well, my experience is I go there all the time and mail stuff. For a time, I was trying to sell some of Jan's mother's items from her house. She had way too much stuff.
Yeah.
And so I put a bunch of stuff on eBay. And the only way to get it to people was by US Postal Service. I mean, that was the best way to do it. And so I was sending all kinds of things through the Postal Service, and it worked very, very well. I've always been very impressed. I mean, I think about it often when I put a letter in my mailbox and I just look at it and say, you know, especially if it's going to go all the way across the country. I said, this is going to go all the way across the country in 2 days. It's amazing.
Yeah, it really is.
It is. It's amazing.
Yeah. So, my grandmother had a post office box.
Oh, yes.
And so, and because our family also had a cabin in the North Georgia mountains, we had a post office box for the cabin, and there was a post office box in our hometown too. So she had a big box at home and this itty bitty box up in the mountain. So anyway, but I just remember constantly like going to the post, like we have to go to the post office and like, you know, what are you doing today? Well, I've got to go to the post office and by the bank, and right. So the post office was always in like this list of places I need to go. I need to go by the post office. And so, you know, visiting the post office was quite frequent. And then I would go regularly for work. And you know, later, I think it might be in the further discussion, right? That it talked about how they lost money. Here was the example. So just jumping down to supplement my answer, that one of their team members, David Hall, offers an example of how the Postal Service has become sidelined by the internet. Mm-hmm. Consider the LL Bean catalog. At one point in time, you got a catalog in the mail, post office income. You filled out the order form and you mailed it back, post office income. And then the items were mailed to you, post office income, right? So 3 items of income are now replaced by an online catalog and online order and delivered by UPS or FedEx.
Right. Or Amazon. Or Amazon.
Yes. So it talks about how has your use of the UPS changed. And so that's kind of like how my experience with the U.S. Postal Service was. For a while, I didn't use them to ship stuff. You couldn't track it really. And they weren't known for being exceptionally reliable with packages for a while. And so for the most part, I would use UPS. UPS would pack. Like I could bring my stuff in and go to the UPS store and they would put it in the box and package it up and, you know, and off it would go. And for a while, their rates were competitive. And you got your tracking, right? Like you knew where your package was going. And UPS, for me, has become more and more expensive. And so there have been times recently where I've gone to UPS and they tell me something and I go, well, thank you so much for that. I'm going to the post office, right?
Yeah.
And so now I just go straight to the post office. And so that has, so like my relationship, my experience with them waned for a little bit. And now it's like, I don't even consider going anywhere else other than the post office. I put it in the box myself answer my questions about if it contains anything hazardous or dangerous. And off it goes. And I get a tracking number, right? Because you have the option to do priority. You got flat rate shipping. Anyway, so I am a huge postal fan. And it's just one of the things I've come to depend on it. I look forward to the mail. And then I think there was a period of time where, we taught all of our children that the postman is your friend, right? And there was Mr. McFeely and the postal worker who showed up with Mr. Rogers. So
that's right.
Yay, post office. Who doesn't like getting like real mail, like a letter?
Well, yeah, and you're really good about writing thank you notes and sending them via the mail, and so people get a real letter in the mail. We got a real letter in the mail just yesterday. It was nice.
So I mean, I'm sorry for the loss of revenue for them for those little postcards, and I haven't noticed a drop in them, by the way. But those little postcards that you get that the furniture store is closing again and everything's on sale.
It's been bought out, having a liquidation sale, and somebody else bought it.
Our VOA is going to be in your neighborhood, fill up a paper bag and leave it on your porch, whatever. To me or the current resident, and those just, So I don't look forward to those, but I look forward to real mail. I look forward to when my, Christian Century comes each bi-weekly or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So do you find any particular significance in a letter, whether writing one or receiving one?
I rarely write letters anymore unless they're a thank you note that I send to people.
Yeah.
So much of what communication I do is through text and email. It's just a changing world. I do use the post office for packages. Use them almost exclusively because really they are cheaper than UPS. They are cheaper than FedEx at this point in time. But that may be their problem. They may be getting business, but they may be doing it at a pace they can't afford.
Yeah.
And a price they can't afford.
Have you saved any letters?
Do I what?
Have you saved any cards or letters?
I have saved some letters over the years, yeah. Indeed I have.
What led you to save
letters?
What leads you to save them?
Because it's about an event that I want to remember, or somebody has, said something very, very nice about me and what I've done, and it's worth keeping that to remember that once upon a time I did something decent.
Look, somebody liked me once.
Well, yeah. How about you? Do you save letters for the same reason?
So I've shared this with you before. So it started at birth. My mother saved every card that I got as a little person from birth on. So I just had this thing that you get a card and you save it, right? So like I have one. So sometimes what's difficult now is that sometimes they get dropped off here at the office. So like I have a little envelope here, right, with my name on it and this. And so here's what we would do. You open the card, you read whatever sweet thing they had to say, and back here on the back of the card, somewhere around here, you would write the year. And if it came with a gift or there was money inside the card, you wrote that here too. So I have all these cards from since I was a little person that I have not been so great about it the older I've gotten, but it had the year written on the back so you could throw the envelope away. But it's all these note cards or letters or whatever that since I was a little person from whomever. And so I've always saved. Somebody thought enough to buy a card and sign it or whatever, and I kept it. So I have boxes of cards, and I know I need to go through them and start like parsing them out. But there is something really sweet to know that I have in one of those boxes first notes from my great-grandparents, right? That somewhere in there is letters from my great-grandparents, or my aunts, or like friends from whenever or wherever I was. I still have those cards, right? The older I get, the more I realize it's whoever has to go through my things when I'm gone is gonna look at them and go, "Oh, it's a box of cards. Okay," and throw it away. Right? Like, just
Probably.
that was easy, right? Like, just, this is all cards, okay, and let it go, right? But because those are my memories, they're not their memories. They don't need to hold on to it. And so what I have started doing over the past several years is if it just had a signature, I go ahead and let it go. If it had a note written in it, then I saved it. Right. So, but if it was like, so some of the places I worked, it was one of the things to like, everybody gave each other a Valentine card, right? Like you would walk around and you like drop out. And so some of them just have a name on it or a Christmas card, and we would hang the cards on our doors or whatever. And I saved all of them. And then one day I was like, why am I saving it? It just has their name in it. You know, and so I've started to let those go, which is my remembrance that I need to go back through my cards. But like I have sweet notes from people that mailed cards from when I graduated from high school that, you know, so-and-so wrote to say, you know, I'm so proud of you and best wishes and whatever. So there is not much that I save anymore. But mail. Mail's my hard one. So anyway, so all right, so speaking of letters, in your opinion, why are there so many letters in the Bible?
Oh, there you go. I knew we'd come to that eventually.
Why?
Letter writing was the new technology. I mean, when you think about it, memorizing sagas and poems and stories was largely the way that people communicated across groups. And it wasn't until the Greco-Roman world that people started writing letters. And it caught on rather quickly. It was the email of its day. The fact that you could actually put something down on papyrus and give it to a courier, and it would go across the empire, was just amazing. You know, it's kind of like me saying, I can't believe I put this in my mailbox, and 2 days later it's in California.
Yeah.
You know, it was a similar thing. You know, St. Paul dictates a letter, somebody scribes it on papyrus or some kind of vellum or whatever they were using to write on. They wrap it up, and a week later it's in Corinth. You know? It was a means of communication. Now, the difference between letter writing then and letter writing now is thoughtfulness. Since you could only get a letter to somebody maybe once a week at best, or once a month, you wanted to communicate everything you knew you wanted to communicate. So the letters that we have in the New Testament especially, all tend to follow a very similar format that was true of Greco-Roman letters in those days. There's a salutation, there's a thanksgiving, there is a introduction of whoever's, you know, sending the letter or the person who's bringing it, and then there's the bulk of the letter, which is, this is what I want you to think about. And then there's a closing, and again, another thanksgiving. It's a general pattern that's observed. But for that middle section, the long part of it, the whole bulk of the letter, there was quite a degree of thoughtfulness that had to go into it. And one of the things I like to remind people of is that our ancient ancestors were pre-technological, they were not dumb. And as a matter of fact, all the techniques of rhetoric, how to make a case, how to argue your point, how to make a great speech, all the elements of rhetoric were already well known by the first century. So Paul and other letter writers are trying to use their knowledge of rhetoric to impart knowledge to the people to whom they're writing. And because we've saved those letters, we assume they're trying to impart knowledge to us as well.
So, one of the things that came to mind while you were talking, though, is that, and perhaps another reason letter writing has fallen by the wayside to a large degree. I was thinking of, like you're thinking of like finding grandma and grandpa's old war letters, right? Or finding letters that people used to, old letters from relatives of the past, right? Or correspondence between generals or different people. And so what I was thinking of, well, now you just call or you text, right? Well, you could have called before, but you had long distance.
Yes, it's more expensive.
And you don't have long distance anymore.
Right.
And then I was thinking back before that, well, you sent a telegram, right?
Yeah.
Like how quickly could you get news to someone? And so I was just thinking about, well, that it's not, I think the advent of cell phones and the loss of AT&T reach out and touch someone, the expense of reaching out to touch someone is greatly reduced.
Yeah.
And so, you were talking about like you put everything that you need to in this letter because you don't know the next time you'll, did I get a letter? Did I, can I hear from them?
Right. Well, now if you want to, I don't need to send a letter to tell everybody what's happening in my life. They can read my Facebook page over the last month.
Right. Well, I mean, like even what I did today, right? I called my father in Belgium to wish him a happy birthday. But ordinarily that would have been to have made a long distance international phone call would have been, you send a letter, right? Like,
yeah, prohibitively expensive.
Yes, cost prohibitive. So, one of the things that they point out in here is one of the letters from the Old Testament is, it's not necessarily the sweetest story, but it's the story from Samuel. In the morning, David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it by the hand of Uriah. And the letter he wrote set Uriah in the forefront of the hardest fighting and then draw back from him so that he may be struck down and die. So this is because Bathsheba has become pregnant and David wants Bathsheba for himself. And so he's trying to get rid of the husband. And so, but what that brings with it is, the question they ask about that is, when has a letter carried a significant message, good or bad? And what is the power of that message being written down?
Well, I think of the way, you get a letter from the State Department.
Yeah.
When your relative, the soldier, has died.
Yeah.
And those letters are hard to send.
Yeah.
They're, of course, much harder to receive. Yep.
I think there's something about having to write it. I think having to write things sometimes makes them feel more real.
Right.
And you definitely have it to keep to ruminate on, right? Versus you hear it and you go, maybe I didn't hear that right. But you've got this written or typed, right, message that says good or bad, but you've got this, it kind of makes it more permanent, I guess.
It does.
In a way.
And from time to time, we do use email in that same way.
Yeah.
To send a letter that is purposeful, that is well argued, and we're putting it in writing for a reason, because we want someone to know beyond a shadow of a doubt what we think or what we're concerned about.
Yeah. So one of the other things they talk about is, can private for-profit delivery companies step up and replace the UPS? One problem is that companies such as FedEx and UPS can already drop their packages off at a post office and pay the USPS to deliver them the last mile, right? Yeah. private companies find that it's simply too expensive to include remote locations in their routes.
Yep.
One value of the Postal Service is that it offers to delivery to any place in the country for the cost of the postage, which is well below market value and doesn't cover the actual cost of delivery.
Yep.
So how is the church like the U.S. Postal Service in that no one is simply too expensive to be reached?
Yeah. Well, I think the question itself begs the answer. Of course, everyone is worthy.
Mm.
You know, I do want to go back to the Constitution just briefly.
Yeah.
The fact that the Constitution mandates that we have this is a sign of what one aspect of freedom is. That one aspect of freedom is the freedom to communicate with one another as we see fit. That's part of it. And yes, the fact that the post office goes to every address in every part of this country is the sign that all human beings matter. All are created equal.
I do worry that if you were to privatize mail, that then it does the receiving of communication, as you've said, does then potentially become a class issue.
Yep. Or a location issue.
Yeah.
I mean, what will happen is in the highly rural areas is everybody will be required to have a post office box at the nearest post office, which could be 50, 75 miles away.
Yeah.
So that's, yeah, if we had to privatize it and we did it only for profit,
yeah,
that may be what happens.
So do you remember the U.S. Postal Service motto?
Off the top of my head, neither rain nor sleet nor gloom of night. That one?
Yes, that one.
Shall stop this carrier from their appointed rounds.
Yes. So neither snow nor rain nor heat nor gloom of night stays these couriers from the swift completion of their appointed round.
I missed heat.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that, I mean, I think we've long associated that with, the post office creed, right? That, nothing stops the post office.
Yep.
That, your mail will get delivered. Even if we got to write it in on horseback, right? Like, your mail will be delivered. And so I wonder, like, kind of like the same thing of, how does the post office always goes the last mile? That, how that relates to us as a church, of that, what do we allow to keep us from our appointed rounds as Christians? And is there anything that, should we have, as Christians, should we have a postal creed, right? There's nothing that will keep us from
sharing the love of God.
Yeah.
Well, we have the Friends of the Homeless crew still cooking a meal every Thursday.
Mm-hmm.
Putting it in prepackaged bags and taking it down and leaving it on the porch of Friends of the Homeless, but we're still doing it.
Mm-hmm.
There's just some things that you do. You and I have done private baptisms.
Mm-hmm.
If funeral comes along, we'll do it. Maybe a very small group there, but we'll do it.
Yeah.
Have a couple weddings, same thing. We do what we do. We do what we can.
So we talked a little bit about, like, getting a handwritten note, like, how does that, what does it look like to get something that's written? And one of the things that I'm just kind of interested in how this, like, totally morphs from, like, election to U.S. Postal Service to the history of letter writing to actually handwriting itself, right? So, so they talk about the cursive handwriting. I know, hot topic. Cursive handwriting.
I know it's a hot topic these days.
Has a long, rich history in the U.S. From the copper plate lettering in the Declaration of Independence to the Spencerian script of the Coca-Cola logo.
Mm-hmm. Why am I not surprised?
How?
You talked about the Constitution and Declaration of Independence. They're written in script. Yeah, for the pursuit of happiness. Because the S's look like F's. The pursuit of happiness.
So how is cursive writing connected to letter writing, if at all? And what kind of communication will be lost when this style of writing is lost?
Cursive, the whole point behind cursive is so that you don't have to raise your pen. You just keep moving, and it's meant for speed.
Yeah.
And block letters take longer, but they're easier to read. But what cursive gives is your personality. Everybody's cursive is a little bit different.
Yeah. So about handwriting. So Mama says that my handwriting was atrocious, and so one summer she sent me off to Berry College. I was probably in middle school, so she sends me off to Berry College to take a handwriting course and a typing course. So I learned how to type that summer, appropriate fingering and everything. But then I also took a handwriting class, and they wouldn't let me play the games anymore, right? Like she would give a prize for whoever wrote whatever the neatest, and mine was always the neatest, Mama. So
it wasn't atrocious.
She watches these. But anyway, I learned how to write similar to my mother. And so enough that when I was in high school, she wrote a note one day for my being out sick, and the teacher thought I had done it. And I was in trouble for forging a note from my mom, and my mom had to call and say, no, I wrote the note. But speaking of that, because you know how much I love to write, I like writing notes to kids, and I like, I write thank you notes all the time. It's just something that's inherent. And so, but I was told last year, I guess, I wrote notes to the kids, to some of my high schoolers. And Mama said, I had to read my child your note. She couldn't read cursive. Wasn't they couldn't read my handwriting, but they couldn't. So I have more of a script, right? It's more of like a mix of cursive and print. Yeah. But they can't read it. And so, but you're right. I think it has this idea of personality. It's, everybody's handwriting is unique to themselves. And I think it also has to do with thoughtfulness, right? Like, sure. How much time am I willing to, that I put into this? Like, some art handwriting is just like, it's beautiful. Like, it's artistically, yeah. Yes. So.
Oh, well.
All right, so I know we're to wrap us up just a little bit.
Before you do, there's just one thing I want to say.
Yeah.
Is that the Postal Service is also an incredibly good gig. I have had one relative and one friend who did everything they possibly could in their 30s and 40s to make sure they got a job in the Postal Service, because they kept saying to me over and over again, they have the best retirement and health plan for retirement ever.
Has that been since 2006? Since they had, yeah.
Yeah. And so one of these friends actually had double knee replacement, because he was a letter carrier for years and years and years. And I said, was it worth it? See, now you're retired. Now you got all these health benefits. He says, oh, yeah. So for what it's worth, maybe that's why the post office is somewhat in debt.
Well, that's what I was saying, because it's since 2006 they had to have the retirement and the health benefits.
Yep. But even before that, this relative and this friend were both trying to get into the Postal Service because they were good back then too.
Well, because it's a government agency, right? And most government, I think it is huge praise to say they are the highest rated government agency. Like, if I have to deal with any of them, I'd rather deal with, like, the Postman is my friend, right? So, our postal worker is my friend. And so, you know,
most of them are friendly. They, you know, they go out of their way to get our packages going. You know, I remember when we lived in Hudson, the postmaster, if we would bring in a hold our mail certificate, and I gave it to one of these guys, he was the one guy would always say, "Permission to leave granted." And he'd throw it in with the other mail. "Permission to leave granted."
You may go.
Whenever I put out the whole stop the mail for our vacation.
All right, you can go.
It was great. I loved it.
Does he say permission to return granted when you came to pick up the box?
No, he didn't. But they also help us with our passports. I mean, seriously, they got goofy fun stamps, you know.
I always gotta say,
people.
I need pretty stamps.
These are fun people we're dealing with.
Absolutely.
It's sad that the phrase "going postal" is.
Yeah.
Because it's just not the way I experience people at the post office.
No.
Never has been.
No. I've not. Very rarely have I encountered a disgruntled postal worker. They
Same here.
seem to be very happy people.
Same
or
here.
at least they're good at customer service, on the customer service end anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So responding to the news, one of the things that Wired Words suggests is that we take time to write a letter to someone you love, remembering that handwritten messages have always been very personal and powerful forms of communication, even since biblical times.
There you go.
Let's pray. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Thank you, Lord, for the letters that have touched and transformed us over the years. Help us to continue to communicate with integrity and authenticity. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
All right, everybody. We'll see you next time.
See you next time. Have a great day.
Bye.